First up is a film called Polite Society, and very rarely do I get to give this compliment, but I was so relieved that the marketing materials, at least the ones that I saw, did not give away the crux of this film. It gave me just enough to get me interested, to sort of establish who I might be watching, and then actually let the film tell a story that could surprise me and take me on a journey and all that stuff. I feel like, a lot of the times overzealous marketing folks sometimes spoil things, and I know how hard it is to market a film and all this stuff. I know it's tough, but I was very grateful for the opportunity to go on a ride with these characters. So I highly recommend you just go into this film. It did give me enough of like a grounding to be like, yes, I'm interested in this. The film centers around a character called Ria, who's played by Priya Kansara, who is just really great in this. She comes from a British Pakistani family, and she practices martial arts, and her goal is to be a stunt woman someday. And she has this older sister, and I'm an older sister myself. I'm also the martial artist of the family. And so there were so many things for me to connect to. The sibling dynamic between them felt very, very authentic. As Ria's older sister starts to go on her own journeys and navigate her own sort of waters, it's about Ria having to reckon with that and maybe not wanting to move on, and how she is dealing with the changes that are evolving around her. Her older sister gets engaged, and it's just these huge structural changes to their family unit that she's not dealing with well. She's also having to deal with sort of navigating school and the friendship dynamics. Parts of it gave me a little bit Scott Pilgrim vibes, not necessarily as cartoony and, overlaid graphics and things like that, but just maybe a little bit sensibility-wise. The sibling stuff is great. If you come from a family, an immigrant family or an East Asian or, whatever family, you will definitely be able to relate to so many of the dynamics being portrayed here. I just really enjoyed the film. It was funny. Nida Manzoor is the director and writer. She did a show called We Are Lady Parts, which is on Peacock, which is also just a really great, fun show. I think she does a really good job of portraying fully rounded 3D characters, especially women who are flawed and can be selfish and also selfless and all this, I just appreciate that diversity in addition to the sort of visual and cultural diversity that these characters are bringing. But it's still just a great story. Like, it's so not expecting the way this story was to turn out. Ritu Arya plays Lena, who's Ria's older sister. Nimra Bucha plays, her potential mother-in-law, not Ria's, but Lena's potential mother-in-law. And she is just chef's kiss in this. Yeah, there were so many things. I don't want to go into it. I just want you to go see this movie. Like, I had fun. It moves along. The action is really well done. The choreography is really fun. You can see the influences of like classic martial arts films in this film, but it's packaged up in this, teenage girl effectively. And I had such a good time watching this movie. It's relatively short. It moves along super snappily. I can't think of a ton of reasons not to see this movie. I'm going to give it a 4.4 out of 5. The other film I have this week is the latest in Disney's live-action remakes, and it is Peter Pan and Wendy, because we had to add diversity to this title. And don't get me wrong, I'm so in favor of diversity. What I'm not in favor of is this continual remaking of Disney animated classics. And admittedly, Peter Pan is based on J.M Barrie's work, so it's not like they came up with the original story, but if you're, they're doing this thing where they do a lot of the shot-for-shotness of it, and in the case of Peter Pan and Wendy, you can feel that they are trying to make updates in order to make it more modern, in order to make it more inclusive, which generally I am in favor of. However, you have to still make the story interesting, and I am not a Peter Pan person. The most well-known version of it to me is the animated film, but I've seen this story retold so many times over the past few years. Like, I can't even count the number of remakes or inspired bys or whatever it is. And I don't think anything ever adds anything new to it. But what I think the strange thing about this remake live action adaptation version of their own version of it is that it adds a lot of things that don't feel like they enhance the film. And I'm like, who is this for? So you basically, it's the same general plot. You have Peter Pan, who's the boy who doesn't want to grow up. He's played by Alexander Maloney, who I think, young actor. He was fine. These kid actors, it's tough. It's tough. Wendy is played by Ever Anderson, who, again, fine. Yara Shahidi plays Tinkerbell, which, again, does a decent job. They the miming, I found, I was like, I don't know if they just popped her head on a small body or the proportions look super weird, but there was something discombobulating about the character design of Tinkerbell. And then you've got Jude Law as Captain Hook with the worst movie hair potentially in the history of man. You've got Alan Tudyk as Mr. Darling, Molly Parker as Mrs. Darling, Jim Gaffigan as Smee. David Lowery directed this. And okay, so here's where I'm like, what are we doing here? Like, what have we done? So the parts that they add that I was in favor of, I was like, all right, they're trying to make Wendy slightly more progressive and you know, the whole thing slightly more progressive, but they shortcut a lot of the family dynamic in the beginning of the film. And I'm gonna issue a caveat spoiler alert for this, because if you are listening to this, I'm assuming you've seen some version of Peter Pan. I don't think a lot of children listen to these reviews, so sorry, kids. But if you are considering this for yourself or your children, again, I'm assuming you've seen some iteration of this. So they shortcut a lot of the family dynamic in the beginning, which makes me feel less attached to the Darling children as a whole. You know, we kind of just focus on Wendy's story of, you know, she's supposed to be going off to boarding school and she doesn't want to grow up, but you know, they cut out a lot of the classic things that I think actually work really well to establish, like, why do we care about these kids wanting to escape? And obviously, like, fun adventure, yay. But, you know, then it's suddenly like, okay, and we can fly, and we're going off to Neverland, and then Jude Law is there, and he's Hook, and all this stuff. And then they keep adding songs for Captain Hook's crew, which are a bunch of adult men singing. And, you know, we have excluded the sort of classic songs, which maybe it's a rights thing, maybe it's a whatever, but so it does have musical components. But I was like, I feel like this was maybe too influenced by popular trends at the time. You know, there was the sea shanties trending on TikTok or whatever it was for a while, and they're like, oh, we have pirates, we can do a sea shanty, but it is coming out probably 2 years or a year too late for that trend, and it feels already passé and a little how do you do, fellow youths. But I'm also like, what kid is like, you know what I want to hear? Like a little kid who is not on TikTok. It's like, you know what I want to hear? A sea shanty sung by a bunch of grown men. The other thing that they add to this, which I'm, again, in favor of generally, is that Tiger Lily's role is expanded, and I will fully admit that I have not read the book Peter Pan, and so I don't know what Tiger Lily's role in the book is. I am assuming she exists in the book, and, you know, she speaks some sort of indigenous language, which is cool. She's played by Alyssa Wapanadak, and I'm really sorry if I'm butchering her name. I think she does a good job, but she feels very token in this as a byproduct. You know, nobody else speaks her language, but we're all expected to assume that they understand each other. I get it. We're in Neverland. It's magical. No problem. I'm just like, this feels very forced. And as a byproduct, we have definitely not passed the Bechdel test, because only the women only talk, or the female characters are only talking about Peter Pan constantly. I found him, the character of Peter Pan, not necessarily the actor, to be a little bit annoying, but I also find I find the character in general to be a little bit annoying and petulant, but that's because he's a child and now I'm an adult and I've lost all the joy in my life. But the other thing that this film tries to do is give Hook a bit more of a backstory and make him more sympathetic, but I'm like, he's the bad guy. Can we stop doing this? You know, we had Cruella, which gave this woman who wants to murder puppies a backstory and made her the protagonist, not a hero, but the protagonist. And I'm like, I think they kind of wanted this to actually be Hook, the movie, but couldn't use that name. And instead they were like, oh, we'll call it Peter Pan, and then, oh, Wendy, because equality and you know, representation and all that stuff. But again, she is a relegated side character. I mean, there's only so much you can do without completely breaking the story of Peter Pan to bring forward these characters. And again, Jude Law is fine. It's odd to me that this adult character is, you know, seeks vengeance upon a little boy, even though he's an ethereal little boy who doesn't age. Yeah, whatever. I did not like this movie. It is way too long as well. It's an hour and 46 minutes, and I'm just like, you did everything you added did nothing to make me go, oh, this is a more classic version than the original version. You know, I appreciate that there's more representation. You know, the Lost Boys also have Lost Girls because it doesn't matter to them. I'm like, great. But, you know, overall, I just found it dragged. They shortcut a lot of things, but they spend a lot of time on other things that I don't think younger audiences are going to care about. I am not a younger audience, but I would imagine if I had kids, they'd probably be bored by some of this. So I feel like a lot of the joy was taken out of it. Also, it looks/feels cheap. And sorry, but not sorry. You know, I just feel like it feels aggressively green screen, and just they filmed it in a tank and all this. Yeah, I would not. Again, I say this as not a fan of the Peter Pan story as a whole, so not the target audience. If I had to pick a version, I would still pick the original animated version. I say this not having seen the original animated version in a very long time, so it's possible that is problematic and not watchable. So actually, I know it is problematic, but if you are able to have a conversation with your kids and explain away some of the problems, I think it's a more joyous version. But let's please stop going back to this well of new ideas. New ideas would be great. It's okay to do a new idea. Just because you own the merch rights to something or like the imagery of stuff doesn't mean you have to bleed it within an inch of its life. So Peter Pan and Wendy, for me, is going to get a 2 out of 5, and that's being probably very generous.